In my town, mothers used my name to frighten their daughters. Behave yourself, young lady, or you'll end up like Miss Bell. For 50 years, I was the cautionary tale of Cypress Hollow, Georgia. The woman decent folks crossed the street to avoid on Sunday morning and paid to see on Saturday night. The name whispered behind fans at church picnics. The scandal with a gate, a garden, and the finest bourbon in 3 counties. Tonight, at 74 years old, I'm going to tell you what really happened. All of it. The judge, the forged paper, the house they could never shut down, and the reason they never could. And by the end of this story, I promise you this, you'll be using my name differently. But first, you tell me something. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I mean it. I spent 5 decades being talked about. You cannot imagine what it does to an old woman's heart to finally be talked to. I read every comment on this channel with my evening tea. And if you believe a woman's story deserves to be heard whole, not in whispers, not in warnings, but whole, then press that subscribe button before I go one word further. Consider it your invitation through my gate. Everyone always wanted one. Now, let me tell you what I was doing 3 nights ago, because that's really where this telling begins. 3 nights ago, I sat in front of my fireplace with a tin box on my knees, the kind of box men used to keep important papers in, back when papers could ruin a man. And one by one, I fed 50 years of paper to the fire. Letters, ledgers, photographs I'd promised certain families would never see daylight, and I am a woman of my word, even to people who were never once decent to me. I watched names that used to run this county curl up orange and float away up the chimney, and I'll confess to you, it was one of the great satisfactions of my life. But there was one thing I did not burn: a notebook. Plain, brown, water-stained on one corner, held shut with a rubber band that's older than most of you watching. I took it out of the tin, and I held it a long moment. And then I set it on the mantel, where it is sitting right now, behind me, while I talk to you. You'll learn what's in that notebook. You'll learn why, for 40 years, every man who tried to close my doors woke up the next morning and changed his mind. You'll learn about a summer festival in 1974, and a proposal under paper lanterns, and a judge with soft hands and a hard appetite, and a signature at the bottom of a document that broke 4 lives. A signature that belonged to the very last person you'd suspect. And you'll learn about the knock that came at my door 6 weeks ago. A young woman standing on my porch, 20-something, nervous as a bird, holding an envelope so old the ink had gone brown. What was inside that envelope had waited 52 years to reach me. It rewrote everything, my whole story, the villain and the victim of it. And when I finished reading it, I sat down on my porch steps like a girl and wept into my hands. And then I got up and I called the number that arranged this recording. Because a secret, held long enough, stops being protection and starts being a grave. I've buried enough. I'm done digging. They called my house many things over the years. The families called it a den. The sheriff called it a headache. The men called it Saturday. I called it the Magnolia House, and I built it with my own money on the prettiest rise in the county, directly, mind you. I pasted off myself, across the valley from the steeple of First Baptist, so that every Sunday morning, the whole congregation had to look at my white columns while they sang about forgiveness. Petty? Oh, sugar. You have no idea yet what was done to me, but you will. Pour yourself something warm. We're going back to 1974, to a flower shop on Main Street, to a girl of 22 who believed, the way you can only believe once, that her life was already decided and that it was going to be sweet. Her name was Belinda Hargrove. She was me. And she had 11 days of that sweet life left. Cypress Hollow in 1974 was the kind of town where you could tell the time by other people's habits. Miss Ida walked her terrier at 7. The bank opened at 9, and Mr. Cottle unlocked it at 8:58 exactly, because his father had, and his father's father. The train came through at noon without stopping, and the whole town paused half a breath to let it pass, like a held note in a hymn. I grew up over a watch repair shop on Main Street, raised by my grandfather, Elias Hargrove. My parents were gone by the time I was 6, a wet road and a log truck, and that's all I'll say of that. Because Papa Elias filled the hole they left so completely that I never learned to feel poor about it. He was a small, precise man with a jeweler's loop permanently denting his brow, and he could take a watch that had been silent for 30 years and coax it back into speech. People brought him dead heirlooms from 4 counties over. He'd hold each one to his ear like a doctor, and then he'd look up and say the same thing every time. It wants to run. They all want to run. Something's just in the way. Remember that. He was talking about more than watches. He usually was. I worked next door at Dovey's Flowers, and by 22 I mostly ran the place. Dovey's knees had retired before the rest of her. I did the church arrangements, the funeral pieces, the prom corsages for girls who giggled, and the graveside roses for their grandmothers, sometimes in the same afternoon. A flower shop teaches you the whole human calendar. I loved it. I loved the cold breath of the cooler, the green smell of cut stems, the way an armful of white magnolias could make a hard man's face go soft in the doorway. And I loved Nathaniel Ashford. I need you to see him the way I saw him, before everything, because the town spent 50 years seeing us both wrong. Nathaniel was the only son of the Ashford family. Timber money, pew number 2, his mother in gloves till June, and his father, Harlan Ashford, a man I'll be saying more about. God help us both. But Nathaniel himself carried none of the starch. He was tall and easy, with a laugh that arrived before he did, and he'd been coming into Dovey's every Friday for a year, buying flowers for my mother, until Dovey finally said, loud enough for the street to hear, "Boy, your mama's house must look like a funeral parlor by now. Ask the girl to the pictures and give us all some peace." He went red as a rooster, and he asked, and that was that, the way it sometimes simply is. The proposal came at the summer festival, June of '74. Paper lanterns strung across the square, a bluegrass trio, the whole town smelling of fried peach pies. Nathaniel waited until the lantern light was just right. He confessed later he'd circled the square 3 times working up his nerve. And he went down on one knee right between the pie stand and the horseshoe pit, and the band stopped, and half of Cypress Hollow watched Belinda Hargrove put her hands over her mouth and cry, yes. Papa Elias stood at the edge of the crowd that night, and when I looked over at him, he tapped 2 fingers on his chest, over his heart, our private sign. Since I was small, for it wants to run, everything in its right place, everything ticking. I have replayed that evening more times than any other hour of my life. The lanterns, the pie smell, Nathaniel's hands shaking as he fumbled the little ring box. And, because memory is cruel in its bookkeeping, one other detail, off at the margin, that meant nothing to me then and everything to me later. Harlan Ashford, my future father-in-law, standing under the bank awning in his good gray suit, watching his son kneel in the dirt for the watch repairman's granddaughter. Not smiling, folding his gloves over and over in his hands, slow and neat, like a man working through a problem. Harlan was a lawyer by training and a fixer by nature. A man of documents, Papa Elias called him, and never warmly. In Cypress Hollow, if land changed hands, if a will got read, if a debt got called or quietly forgiven, Harlan Ashford's fountain pen had been in the room. He believed in 3 things: timber, lineage, and paper. And his son had just proposed, in public, to a girl who possessed none of the 3. He shook my hand that night, dry, brief, correct. "Welcome to the family, Miss Hargrove," he said, and his eyes did the arithmetic on me the whole time, and I was 22 and lit up with lanterns and love, and I mistook cold for shy. 11 days. That's what was left of that girl. 11 days of pricing out wedding flowers with Dovey, of Papa Elias humming at his workbench, of Nathaniel driving me out to the ridge at sunset to show me the acre his granddaddy had promised him, where our house would go. On the 12th day, the courthouse dedication brought a visitor to town. A great man, everyone said. A federal judge, come down from Atlanta with a police escort and a cream-colored automobile to cut a ribbon and bless our little town with his importance. His name was Judge Aldous Whitmore, and he saw me on the courthouse steps holding the ceremonial arrangement. 24 white magnolias, my own arrangement, my best work. He looked at the flowers for 1 second. He looked at me for 5. Judge Aldous Whitmore was the kind of man who had never once heard the word no spoken in his direction. Not by waiters, not by governors, and certainly not by the daughters of small towns he honored with his presence. He was 60 then, or near it. Silver hair combed like it had been legislated. Soft hands. I noticed at the ribbon cutting when he took the magnolias from me for the photograph. Soft hands, and a way of holding a smile out to you like a coin he expected you to be grateful for. The mayor trotted behind him all afternoon. The pastor laughed at his jokes before they ended. That's the thing city people never understand about a small town. When power visits, the whole place bends around it like grass in wind, and anyone who stands up straight becomes very, very visible. I stood up straight. God forgive me, I didn't even know I was doing it. And who arranged these? He asked at the ceremony, loud enough to be a public question. Someone pointed at me. He walked over, took his time about it, and said, "A talent like this, wasted on a town this size." And I said, 22 years old, engaged, happy, unafraid, because I had never yet needed to be afraid. "It's not wasted, Your Honor. This town is where everyone I love lives." The men laughed politely. The judge did not laugh. He looked at me the way a collector looks at a piece in someone else's cabinet. The visit started that same week. His stay in Cypress Hollow, meant to be 3 days, stretched. He found reasons, inspections, hearings, dinners in his honor at the Ashford house, no less, because Harlan Ashford never missed a chance to pour bourbon for power. And in between, the cream-colored automobile began appearing on Main Street. He'd come into Dovey's trailing his driver, buy the most expensive thing in the cooler, and talk at me, never about Atlanta, about the parties, about what a shame it was, a shame, a genuine shame that certain flowers bloom where no one of consequence will ever see them. I told him I was engaged. He said, "Of course you are. The way you'd tell a child, of course Santa is real." I stopped taking his orders and let Dovey handle him. He sent flowers to me, to a florist, the arrogance of the man, and I sent them to the hospital in Milledgeville. I said no in every polite grammar a Southern girl is issued, and then in a few that aren't. And I made the mistake that honest people always make with men like Whitmore. I believed that no was the end of a sentence. For men like him, no is just the part that comes before the paperwork. It was the first week of August when Papa Elias came up the stairs holding a letter, and I knew from his footsteps, I knew that man's tread like his watches knew time, that something had gone wrong in the world, a demand for payment. On debts my grandfather did not owe. Loans, the letter said, signed instruments going back 9 years, borrowed against the shop, against the building, against the tools of his trade, with interest compounding in default, the whole balance called due. The sums were impossible. The claim was held, through a shell of lawyers in Atlanta, by interests that a country watch repairman had no way to see behind. But you already see behind them, don't you? You're ahead of the girl I was. Stay with her anyway. She's about to lose everything, and she deserves company. Papa Elias had never borrowed a nickel in his life. He paid cash, or he went without. It was practically his religion. But the papers had his signature, his true, actual signature, lifted, we later understood, from the ordinary documents of an ordinary life, deeds and licenses and delivery receipts, traced by someone with patience and a steady pen. And at the bottom of the master note, beneath the false loans and the true false signature on the line marked Witness, was a name in confident lawyer's ink. I didn't look at the witness line that day. Why would I? We were staring at the numbers, at the ruin. That detail waited for me in the county records office 3 weeks later, like a snake under a step. Papa Elias put on his one good suit and went to fight. He was 79 years old, and he was not afraid of anybody, because a man who spends his life making stop things run again has a kind of faith in mechanisms, courts, laws, decency, that they will, if you open them up honestly, tick. He requested an audience with the visiting judge, since His Honor was so conveniently in town. He got one. In the back room of the courthouse, he had watched them dedicate with magnolias. I was not allowed in the room. I sat in the corridor on a pew-hard bench, and I heard the murmur of it through the door, my grandfather's voice, level and precise, laying out his case like gears on felt. And then a silence. And then Whitmore's voice, too low to carry words, but not too low to carry meaning, and the meaning was amusement. And then I heard a chair go over. Papa Elias died on the courthouse floor. His heart, which had been, the doctor told me without a shred of irony, an old mechanism under sudden strain. They let me hold him in that corridor while the town doctor came running, and Judge Whitmore stood in the doorway of the back room with his soft hands folded, wearing the exact expression of a man watching weather. I will tell you the whole truth, as I promised. At the funeral, the judge sent the largest arrangement. White lilies, ordered from Atlanta. I carried them out behind the church with my own hands, and I burned them on the trash pile in front of God and the sexton, and that was the first scandalous thing Belinda Hargrove ever did in Cypress Hollow. The town clucked. Grief-struck, poor thing. 3 weeks later, the debts came due against the estate, and I went to the records office to read every page of what was destroying us. I had appointments to keep by then, a wedding to postpone, a shop to surrender. And that is where I finally saw it. The witness line, the confident ink, not some Atlanta stranger's name. H.G. Ashford, Harlan, my Nathaniel's father. Witness to loans that never happened, on paper that killed my grandfather, in service of a judge he'd poured bourbon for all summer. I stood in the records office with the county clerk, pretending not to watch me, and I understood, all at once, the way you understand ice when it breaks under you, that this had never been only the judge's appetite. It had been a transaction. And I was the goods. What happened next was called, in the language of that time and place, an arrangement. I want you to hear the word the way the town said it, smooth, lowered, final. And then I want you to hear what it actually meant, because half the evil in this world gets done under soft vocabulary. The estate owed what it could never pay. The debt holders, that Atlanta shell with the judge behind its curtain, offered terms. The shop and building would be surrendered, the balance forgiven, all litigation withdrawn, contingent upon my accepting a position of employment in Savannah. Household management, the paper said, for a distinguished jurist, residence provided. You understand what I'm telling you. Everyone understood. Nobody said it. The lawyer who presented the terms, one of Harlan's colleagues naturally, could not look above my collarbone the entire meeting. And here is the question I've been asked, in one form or another, for 50 years, usually by people who have never been poor, orphaned, 22, and legally cornered all in the same season. Why didn't you just refuse? Sugar. With what? The law was the thing hunting me. Refusing to the law is a game for people with lawyers, and every lawyer in 3 counties dined at Harlan Ashford's table. My grandfather was 3 weeks in the ground. The wedding was postponed. Nathaniel had been sent, quite suddenly, to his uncle's timber operation in Oregon, a business emergency of miraculous timing, and my letters to him went unanswered, which broke me then and makes perfect sense now, and we will get to why. I had a choice the way a creek has a choice about the shape of its banks. So in October of 1974, I packed one suitcase and I left Cypress Hollow in the cream-colored automobile, and the town watched from behind its curtains and began the 50-year story it liked better than the truth. That Hargrove girl ran off with a rich man before her poor grandfather was cold. The house on Gaston Street in Savannah was beautiful, the way a museum is beautiful. High ceilings, old portraits of other people's ancestors, azaleas kept by a gardener I was not to speak with. I had fine rooms, fine clothes appropriate to the household standing, and doors I could open to the garden, but not, in any way that mattered, to the street. The judge came and went between Atlanta and Washington and his circuit. When he was in residence, I was required at his table, at his side at private dinners, at his— I'll say it the old way, because the old way says enough. I was required. This is the lowest floor of my story, and I'll stand on it just this once, plainly, and then we'll climb. I spent that first winter learning what it does to a person to be furniture, not beaten. Whitmore never once raised a hand. Men like him don't need to. That's the point of men like him. Just owned, inventoried, displayed at dinners the way the silver was displayed, and put away afterward with the same amount of conversation. I would stand at my window at night and look at the live oaks with their beards of moss, and I couldn't even cry with my whole chest, because grief requires a self to grieve from, and mine was packed in a suitcase somewhere I couldn't find. What saved me was small, and it was strange, and I've never told it before. One February evening, setting the table under the housekeeper's eye, I caught my own reflection in the bowl of a polished spoon, upside down, the way spoons hold you. And I heard Papa Elias, clear as his workbench. It wants to run. They all want to run. Something's just in the way. I stood there holding that spoon, and something in my chest went tick. Not hope. I want to be precise because this is the hinge of my whole life. It was not hope, which is soft. It was arithmetic, which is hard. I began, standing right there at that glittering table, to count. The judges' dinners. Who came, what they wanted, what they let slip after the third bourbon. The envelopes that changed hands in the study. The names, the favors, the fears. A watch repairman's granddaughter knows how a mechanism works. Every wheel is driven by another wheel. And if you can see the train of gears, you know where the power actually comes from. And it is never, ever the hands on the front of the clock. I looked around that dining room, at the most important men in Georgia laughing at the judge's jokes before they ended, and I made myself a vow, the first of the two great vows of my life. If I was going to be kept as a possession, I would become the most expensive possession this man ever regretted owning. And when I walked out of this beautiful cage, and I would walk out, I would not walk out empty-handed. I would walk out carrying the door. The next morning, I asked the housekeeper for a small notebook for menus and marketing. Brown, plain, water-stained now on one corner. It's on the mantel behind me. Now I'm going to tell you about the years everyone thinks they know, the wicked years, the years the sermons were about. And you're going to find out what actually happened on Gaston Street, which is both less scandalous and far more dangerous than anything First Baptist ever imagined. Judge Whitmore traveled, half of every month, sometimes more, Atlanta, the circuit, Washington increasingly, because he had ambitions with marble columns on them. And a man like that cannot resist displaying his possessions even in absence. The house on Gaston Street was expected to entertain. Small dinners for his allies passing through Savannah. Cards in the study for the men who mattered. His instructions were explicit. The household would receive his circle graciously, and I, presented always with that coin-flip smile, as his ward, a word that let everyone enjoy the lie politely. I would be gracious. Very well. I became gracious the way a bank becomes friendly. Understand what walked through that door twice a week? State senators, shipping men from the port, a railroad heir, judges junior to Whitmore and hungry, bankers, landmen, 2 future congressmen, and 1 future governor. I'll take those names to my grave, but I'll take them smiling. Powerful men away from home, drinking another man's bourbon, in the company of a young woman they believed was the judge's secret, and therefore, by the logic of such men, negotiable. They desired me. I let them. Desire is the most honest thing about a dishonest man. It's the one moment his ledger is open on the table. And before your imagination runs off down the road, Let me hand you the truth I've never handed anyone. What those men purchased at Gaston Street, at prices that would water your eyes, was almost never what the town of Cypress Hollow spent 50 years assuming. What they purchased was audience, an hour where somebody beautiful listened, really listened, leaned in, remembered their daughter's name and their rival's weakness, and asked about both. Lonely is the most underestimated force in the affairs of powerful men, sugar. I learned it at 23, and it built everything I ever owned. They brought gifts, because men of that class cannot conceive of favor without freight. Jewelry, mostly. Pieces for the household, wink, pieces their wives would never inventory. Gold coins in one memorable instance, from a landman who'd made his first fortune before paper money impressed him. Stock certificates, twice. I accepted everything with lowered lashes, and I kept a strict private commandment, the second vow, the one that kept me alive inside. The heart stays closed. The vault stays open. They could buy my evening. Not one of them ever touched the girl who'd cried yes under the paper lanterns. She was elsewhere. She was busy. She was counting. And everything went in the notebook. Not diary sentimentality, I had no self to spare for that yet. Entries, who came, who paid whom, in the study and for which vote, which contract, which quietly killed indictment. Which senator wept about his son. Which banker's hands shook before Atlanta called. Dates, amounts, witnesses. I wrote it all in the tiny, precise hand I'd inherited from a man who labeled watch parts smaller than rice grains, and I sewed the notebook into the lining of a winter coat the judge had bought me, which pleased me in a way I trust you understand. Jewelry converts to cash quietly if you're patient, and you know a discreet dealer, and Savannah, bless her crooked old heart, has never lacked discreet dealers. Cash converts to more if you listen at dinner. I knew what land the railroad wanted 8 months before the railroad's own surveyors did, because the heir talked when he drank, and a certain small parcel outside town was bought that spring by a certain unremarkable holding company with a florist's name buried 3 papers deep. The men laid their business bare in front of me for years because it never once occurred to a single one of them that the decoration was doing arithmetic. 4 years that education lasted. By the end of it, the ward of Gaston Street, inventoried, displayed, owned, had quietly become, I'd wager, one of the richer unmarried women in coastal Georgia, and not one living soul knew it. The end came in the spring of 1979, and it came the way I'd always known it would, by envelope. Whitmore got his summons, the great appointment, the marble columns. Washington wanted him whole and unencumbered and seemly. A man ascending cannot arrive trailing a ward. He didn't tell me himself. That would have required regarding me as tellable. His lawyer came on a Tuesday morning with a single cream envelope. The house to be closed, my position concluded, a settlement enclosed in consideration of service, and a stiff little paragraph about discretion with the unsubtle shadow of the law behind it, from the man who had taught me exactly what the law's signature was worth. I opened the envelope at the garden door. The settlement was, by his lights, generous, a check calibrated to the value of a possession he was retiring. I want you to picture this because of everything in my long life. This may be the moment I'd choose to live again. A woman of 27, standing in a Savannah garden in April, azaleas going off like fireworks all around, holding a rich man's idea of her total worth in one hand, and laughing, actually laughing, out loud, alone, until the gardener I was never to speak with looked up from his beds in alarm. Because sewn into the coat upstairs was more than his check by multiples. Because filed under a flower shop's name were land deeds he'd never dream of. Because the notebook against my ribs weighed nothing and outweighed him entirely. The great Judge Whitmore, ascending to Washington, was discarding an asset without ever once in 4.5 years having audited it. He never knew what I took because he never knew what I was. I cashed his check too, mind you. I'm dignified, not foolish. Then I packed one suitcase, a much better suitcase, and I bought a car with my own money, cream-colored, and don't you think for 1 second that was an accident. And I pointed it inland, northwest, toward the red clay and the pines, toward Cypress Hollow, toward the ridge where an acre had been promised and a house was meant to go, toward Nathaniel. 5 years I had carried him, folded small, hidden deep, the one entry that never went in any notebook. Every mile of that highway, the girl from the lantern light climbed back up out of the vault where I'd kept her safe, smoothing her dress, rehearsing her first line. She never got to say it. I reached Cypress Hollow on a Saturday in late April, and the town square hadn't changed one board. Same bank, same awning, same noon train through at 12. 5 years, and the place had simply gone on ticking without me, and something about that raised the first small flag of dread even before I saw him. Because I did see him. Right there. That's the cruelty of small towns. There's no antechamber, no time to arrange your face. I stepped out of the car in front of what had been Papa Elias's shop, a hardware store now. They'd kept his big window. And 40 feet away, coming out of Cottle's Bank with his hat in his hand, was Nathaniel Ashford. He'd gone from a boy to a man in the shoulders and around the eyes. He saw me, stopped like he'd walked into glass. The hat went still in his hands. And I looked, because a woman who has spent 5 years reading men across dinner tables reads fast now, faster than mercy. I looked at those hands. Gold band, left hand, third finger. Everything after that, we said, standing on the sidewalk in front of the whole watching town, 6 feet apart, like witnesses giving testimony at the scene of an old accident. Which is, I suppose, exactly what we were. Belinda. Even my name came out of him bent. They said you were in Savannah, all this time, with him. He couldn't make the word judge. You left before the funeral flowers wilted, Belinda. No letter, nothing. 5 years, nothing. I wrote you, I said, that first autumn. 11 letters, Nathaniel. Oregon. There were no letters. He said it fast, certain, wounded, and Lord help me, he believed it. I watched him believe it. And in that moment, on that sidewalk, I could not yet see the shape of how both things could be true. I only learned to see it later. Keep those 11 letters in your hand, sugar. This story isn't done with them. They told me things I refused to believe, he went on, quieter, the hurt turning as hurt does. Daddy said, people said, that you'd made an arrangement, that you chose it, chose him. Money over the ridge, over me. I called them liars for a year, Belinda. A year. And then you never came, and never wrote, and a man can only... He stopped. Put his hat on, which is what our men do instead of weeping. I married Grace Dooley in the fall of 77. She waited out my year of calling people liars, and she was kind about it. We're expecting, in September. Grace Dooley. I remembered her from school, 2 grades down, a slight, gentle girl, pretty in the way of things you must be careful with. She had loved Nathaniel from the church balcony her whole quiet life. Everyone had known it and been sweet about it, the way towns are sweet about hopeless things. Not hopeless anymore. I want to tell you, I said something magnificent. The Miss Bell of legend would have, but she wasn't born yet. She was born on that sidewalk in the next 60 seconds, and birth is never eloquent. What I actually said was, the debts were forged, Nathaniel. All of it was forged. I can prove. And I saw his face close like a shop at noon. Not cruelly. Worse. Sadly. He had 5 years of the town's story in him, packed down hard by his own father's hand, though he didn't know that last part, and my truth bounced off it like rain off a tin roof. Don't, he said, gentle as a funeral. Please, I'm glad you're well, Belinda. I have to get on. And Nathaniel Ashford put his hat brim down and walked past me, close enough that I caught the smell of cedar and clean cotton, close enough to touch, and did not touch, and got in his truck and drove toward a house where a kind woman was sewing something small. I stood on Main Street a long time. The town watched from behind its glass. Nobody came out. That night I took a room at the Colonnade Hotel, the good hotel, the one Hargroves had never had reason to enter, and I sat at the window with the notebook on my knees, and I made the third vow, the one that 50 years of sermons got exactly backwards. The town always said Miss Bell's heart was for sale. Hear the actual words, spoken to a dark window in April of 1979. No man will ever hold this heart again. Not for love, which lies. Not for money, which at least doesn't.
From this night, I choose, everything, always, only I choose. And this town that swallowed a forged story whole and licked the plate, this town is going to look at me every single day for the rest of its natural life. In the morning, I asked the desk clerk one question: whether the old Pemberton place, the white-columned ruin on the rise across the valley from First Baptist, gone to vines since the Pemberton's timber failed, was still bank-held. It was. By Cottle's Bank.
In this town, sugar, even revenge, is local. I was at the bank at 8:58 when Mr. Cottle unlocked the door. I was wearing Savannah's best and carrying a cashier's check, and I bought that rise, cash, before 10 o'clock. The house, the oaks, the long meadow, and the view. Oh, the view. From the Pemberton porch, you could see the steeple of First Baptist perfectly, which meant, of course, that from First Baptist, you could see the Pemberton porch. Perfectly. It took a year to raise the Pemberton place from the dead, and I supervised every nail of it in good dresses, visibly from a porch chair, waving at everyone who slowed their car to stare. Which was everyone. I painted the columns fresh white. I put in gardens, camellias, tea roses, and down both sides of the drive, planted with my own 2 hands, 42 magnolia trees. I hung a discreet brass plate by the gate, and the plate said Magnolia House, and underneath, smaller, supper, music, cards, by invitation, by invitation. 3 words, and I'd learned their physics on Gaston Street. Nothing on God's green earth makes a powerful man hungrier than a door that doesn't automatically open for him. Let me tell you what the Magnolia House actually was, because 50 years of pulpits have had their turn. Friday and Saturday evenings, my doors opened to invited gentlemen. There was a supper of 6 courses that got written up, years later, in an Atlanta paper. My cook, Miss Ophelia, came from Savannah and could make a bishop weep with her crab soup. There was bourbon older than the sheriff. There was a card room, honest tables, house percentage, and a Victrola, and later a proper little band, and dancing and girls. Yes, there were girls. And here is what I'll say about that once and level. Every woman who ever worked under my roof came to me already fallen by the town's arithmetic, most of them thrown out of somewhere by somebody. And in my house they had wages, doctors, locked doors that locked from their side, savings accounts. I marched them to the bank to open myself and the ironclad law of the establishment. Everything in my house, at every hour, was chosen. Any man who required persuading of that law was handed his hat by Big Robert at the door, and his name went in a book he never got out of. The town called my house a den of sin. I ran the only building in that county where a woman's no had armed enforcement. And then there was the ritual, the thing that made the legend, the reason men drove from 4 states. Each evening at 10, supper done, cards paused, the band would go quiet. And I would come down the front staircase. I had gowns made for exactly this, ivory always, always ivory. And I would walk the room slow with a glass of champagne, greeting the company. And at some point in that circuit, I would stop before one gentleman, and hand him my glass. That was all. The chosen man dined at my private table the following evening, 1 hour, alone with the notorious Miss Bell. Conversation, sugar. The whole county assumed otherwise, and I let it assume. Assumption was my finest advertising, and it cost me nothing. Men schemed for months to be chosen. Senators, I'll say it now, it's been 50 years. Senators lost at my card tables on purpose, thinking generosity would sway the choosing. It did not. Nothing swayed the choosing. The choosing was the entire point. One woman in one county in Georgia deciding, nightly, publicly, at her own staircase, I choose. Everything, always, only I choose. If they'd understood what they were watching, they'd have burned me for a witch. Instead, they lined up. Now the part I've never said aloud. The Magnolia House turned a fortune, but it was not built for money. I had money. It was not even built first for the town, though watching First Baptist install thicker vestibule curtains gave me years of quiet nourishment. It was built. Every white column, every lit window on every Saturday night blazing across that valley, for an audience of one man on the Ashford Ridge, 3 miles northeast. Every lantern was a letter. Every rumor that reached him was a page of it. You believed I chose money over you. Watch me choose then. Watch me choose everyone but you, forever, in lights you can see from your porch. Cruel? To him, to Grace, to myself, all three, and I knew it even then. But wounds want a pen, sugar, and mine wrote in lamplight for 40 years. I've quit apologizing for it. She'll come to collect her due in this story soon enough, Grace. And when she does, you'll see that the ledger between us two women was more tangled than either of us knew that whole long while. Of course they tried to shut me down. Here's the machinery of that, and the notebook's first outing. Summer of 1980, barely open a year. A grand jury convened. Morals charges drafted, the sheriff regretful about it. He was a decent man with indecent pressures, and the pressures wore gray suits and sat in pew number 2. The talk of the county for 3 weeks. And I requested, through my lawyer, Atlanta man, nobody local. I'd learned that lesson in blood. One private meeting with the 3 gentlemen driving the effort. 20 minutes that meeting. No voices raised. I brought nothing but a handbag, and from the handbag I took a plain brown notebook, and I read aloud, quietly, dates and figures only, 1 entry per gentleman. Just one. A study in Savannah. An envelope. A vote that had changed, oh mysteriously, on a Tuesday in 1976. Then I closed the notebook, and I said the sentence I'd rehearsed 5 years for. Gentlemen, I was furniture in the room where this county's business was actually done. Furniture has excellent hearing. There are 106 more entries. Send me a grand jury, and I will send them a reading list. The grand jury dissolved like sugar in August rain. And for 40 years after, through 4 sheriffs, 6 preachers, 2 crusading newspaper editors, and 1 genuinely energetic state's attorney in the 70s, every campaign against the Magnolia House ended the same way. Abruptly, quietly, with the crusader suddenly recalling urgent business elsewhere. The town thought I'd bought them all. I never bought a single one. I just kept the accounts, sugar. Papa Elias would have understood perfectly. Every wheel is driven by another wheel, and I had the diagram. But there was one man the notebook couldn't have stopped because his name wasn't in it. His sins predated my bookkeeping. And he was the one who finally came for me in the open. Harlan Ashford. December of 1982. The Magnolia House, 3 years a legend. My drive full of Lincolns every weekend, and the county's first families at the end of their collective rope. Harlan organized what the paper delicately called a Citizens' Decency Committee. The Ashfords, the Cottles, both preachers, the whole pew-owning class. And they didn't come at me with law this time. They'd learned. They came at me with ceremony, a public petition, to be presented at the town's Christmas Eve gathering on the square, demanding the county revoke every license I held. Signatures gathered on clipboards outside both churches for a month. They meant to make my ruin a civic pageant with carols, so I attended the pageant, Christmas Eve, 1982. The square strung with lights, snow deciding whether to bother, the whole town out, and the crowd parting around me like I was weather, because I came in ivory, of course I did, with Big Robert 2 steps behind, holding my coat. Harlan stood on the bandstand with his petition in his gloved hands, silver-haired now, still folding and refolding things while he worked a problem. He saw me and smiled the way lawyers smile. Miss Hargrove, he said into the microphone, gracious as poison. How fitting. This community was just discussing standards of conduct. So I heard, I said, and I didn't need the microphone. I'd spent years learning to fill rooms. I've come to add a document to the proceedings. And I walked up onto that bandstand. Nobody stopped me. Nobody in that county had physically stopped me from anything in years. And from my handbag, I took not the notebook, but a single photostat. County Records Office. Certified copy. $2. The best $2 I ever spent. You all know about paper, I said to the square. This town runs on it. So before you sign Mr. Ashford's paper tonight, I thought you should see mine. This is the master note on the debts of Elias Hargrove, the debts that killed him on the courthouse floor, the debts that sent me to Savannah, which I notice this committee has never once minded profiting from as a story. The state examiner's office confirmed in 1979 that every signature of my grandfather's on it is a tracing, forged, and here. And I held it up, and I read the witness line into the cold air, each letter separate, like tolling a bell. H.G. Ashford, witness to loans that never existed. Would the chairman of the Decency Committee care to tell the community what exactly he was witnessing? I have seen quiet in my time, deathbeds, empty ballrooms at dawn. I have never, before or since, heard quiet like that square. Harlan's gloves stopped moving, and on his face, for 1 second before the lawyer in him could shutter it, the whole answer showed, plain enough that the front 6 rows saw it, and the back rows heard about it by supper time. He said something about old business, complex instruments, this not being the venue. But it was already done. In a town that runs on paper, I had shown them his signature. The petition never got presented. The committee never met again. The Ashford name, timber, lineage, pew number 2, cracked down the middle that night on the town square at Christmas, with the carolers still holding their sheet music. And through all of it, this is the part that stops my breath at night. Even now, through all of it, I watched one face in the crowd, 3rd row, hatless in the cold. Nathaniel. He had come, I later learned, to stand with his father's committee, dutiful to the last. And he stood there while the photostat came out. And I watched 5 years of certainty leave a man's body in real time. The sidewalk in 79, there were no letters. His year of calling people liars ended by his own father's patient hand. The whole architecture of what he'd believed about me coming down with no noise at all, the way big trees fall in deep snow. He didn't approach me that night. He turned, in that terrible quiet, and looked at his father. And Harlan Ashford, who had faced down the entire square, could not hold his own son's eyes. Nathaniel confronted him that same night. The housekeeper talked. Housekeepers always talk. Voices through the study door until 2 in the morning. And what Nathaniel got confirmed, in that study, was worse than the forgery, worse than the witness line. You've been carrying it with me for 3 blocks now, sugar. 11 letters. Autumn of 1974. Cypress Hollow to Oregon. They were never lost. They were collected. You'll want to know what happened to everybody. 50 years settles most accounts, one way or another. Let me walk you through the ledger. Harlan Ashford lived 9 more years after that Christmas Eve, and they were small ones. The committee dissolved. The dinner invitations stopped. The bank found reasons to prefer other counsel. He was never charged. The forgery had aged past the law's appetite, and Whitmore's Washington shadow lay over anything that might have reached higher. But in a town like ours, unindicted and unforgiven are different sentences, and he served the second one fully. Nathaniel, I'm told, saw him twice more in 9 years. Once at his mother's funeral, once at his own front door, briefly, with the door mostly closed. When Harlan died in 91, the obituary called him a man of documents. I did not write it, but sugar, I could not have written it better. Judge Aldous Whitmore got his marble columns and died under them in 1988. Full honors, flags, a portrait in a federal building that I understand hangs there still. History so far has been kind to him, because history reads the front of the clock. But I'm told a young professor in Atlanta has been requesting his papers lately. You didn't hear that from me. The Magnolia House kept its lamps lit until 2003. Softer and softer through the 90s, less scandal, more supper, as the old lions died off and their sons took their appetites to Atlanta, where sin doesn't require an invitation. I closed the card room the year my knees quit the staircase, and I retired the choosing the same night, at the bottom step, with a last glass of champagne, raised to a full house. And if you think there were dry eyes among those old men, you don't know what ritual comes to mean to the ones inside it. The house is a country inn now. Mine still, run by a manager. Breakfast praised in travel magazines. Wedding parties book it 2 years out. Brides get photographed under my magnolias. First Baptist has learned to live with the view. And here's the entry the town never audited. The one I'll set down now because at 74 you get to choose your own headlines. Over 40-odd years, the wages of scandal did quiet work in this county. Every woman who worked under my roof left it with savings. 11 left it for college, their tuition appearing from a regional women's scholarship fund administered through a certain small holding company with a florist's name buried 3 papers deep. The fund still operates. There are 2 school teachers, a pharmacist, a county judge, sugar, savor that with me, and a heart surgeon in Macon who all got their start on money the pulpits called dirty. The scandal of Georgia paid more tuitions than the collection plate. I kept the accounts. I always keep the accounts. Grace Ashford. We spoke, in 50 years, only a handful of times, pleasantries at the pharmacy, 2 women being flawlessly civil across a canyon. She raised 3 children, kept a lovely garden, nursed Nathaniel's mother at the end, and was, by every account, exactly what she always appeared: gentle, faithful, kind. I want that said plainly and without 1 grain of salt because of what's coming in a minute. She passed away last winter. The church was full. Nathaniel. After that Christmas, he came to my gate exactly once. Spring of '83, hat in his hands, 40 years old and wrecked, and what he came to say, standing under my new magnolias, was that he knew everything now, and that he was sorry past the reach of the word. And what I said to him, and I have measured this moment my whole life since, sugar, so measure it with me, was, "You have a wife who waited out your grief and 3 children who don't deserve a scandal for a father. Go home, Nathaniel. We were killed by paper a long time ago. Let the dead rest." He stood a moment. He said, "You were always the strongest thing in this county." And he put his hat on and went home to Grace, and he stayed home, and he was by all accounts a good husband to her for 41 more years, and I watched his porch light across the valley every night of them. He passed 2 years ago, October. I sent flowers, white magnolias, unsigned. I'm told Grace looked at them a long time and had them set closest to the casket and never said 1 word. I thought that was the end of the story. 2 old porch lights, 1 valley, everything unsaid finally safe in the ground. And then, 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning, a car I didn't know came up my drive, and a young woman got out, 25 maybe, nervous as a bird, with Grace Dooley's chin and Nathaniel's easy height, and stood at the foot of my steps, holding an envelope gone brown at the edges. "Ma'am," she said, "my name is Abigail. Grace Ashford was my grandmother. I've been going through her things, and—" her voice went thin. "Ma'am, I found something addressed to you, and I read it. I'm sorry. I read it." And my daddy said burn it, and my aunt said burn it. She came up 1 step and held it out with both hands, like something that might go off. But I don't think 50 years of a thing being hidden makes hiding it right. I think you were supposed to have this. The envelope said, in a young man's careful fountain ink, Belinda Hargrove, Savannah, postmarked Cypress Hollow, November 1974. 52 years old, that letter. Written 6 weeks after I was taken to Gaston Street. 3 years before he married Grace. It had been opened once, long ago, a neat slit, patient hands, and then kept. I sat down on my own porch steps, 74 years old in my gardening apron, and I read it with Grace's granddaughter standing quiet as a fence post beside me. I'm going to read you only a piece of it. The rest is mine. But this piece belongs to the whole story now, and you've earned it. They tell me you chose this, and I have decided permanently that they are liars. I don't know what happened, Belinda, but I knew your face for 2 years, and I knew your hands in mine at the festival, and whatever is keeping you in Savannah, it is not choosing. So here is what I want you to know. I am coming. When the timber contract releases me in the spring, I will come to that city and stand in front of whatever door they are keeping you behind. And I will knock until somebody's knuckles give out, and it will not be mine. There is an acre on the ridge with your name on it. It can wait. I can wait. I would wait until we were both 74. 74. He wrote that number, sugar, at 25, out of the clean blue air. I sat with those pages in the October light for a long, long while. And then Abigail, bird-nervous, brave girl, braver than 3 generations before her, sat down on the step beside me and finished it, because there was more, and it wasn't on paper. The letter had been intercepted the way all of mine were. Harlan collected everything, both directions. I'd guessed that much on the bandstand in '82. But this last one, Nathaniel had trusted to a friend to post in the next county over, and it had gotten through, actually reached Savannah, and been returned months later, undeliverable, refused at the door of Gaston Street by a household that did not receive mail for its furniture. It came back to Cypress Hollow, to the Ashford house, where a gentle girl who had loved Nathaniel her whole quiet life from the church balcony was, by then, engaged to him, and helping his mother with the correspondence. Grace found it. Grace read it. And Grace, 22 herself, holding in her 2 hands the letter that would send her almost husband to Savannah to knock on doors until his knuckles gave out, made the one bad choice of a long, good life. She kept it. But hear me now, because this is why I'm telling this story at all, and why I wept on those steps not for myself, but for her. She kept it for 50 years. Not burned. A match takes 1 second, and she had 18,000 days of seconds. She kept it through her whole marriage, through children and gray hair and Nathaniel's funeral, wrapped in tissue in her cedar box where she knew it would be found when she was gone. Abigail told me there was a note pinned to the tissue in an old woman's careful hand, 4 words. She should know now. That was Grace's confession, sugar. Mailed from the far side of the grave, 52 years late, and braver than anything I ever did at a bandstand, because my reckonings all came with armor and hers came with nothing at all. So now you know why the town's 50-year story was wrong in every particular. The judge took a woman who never chose him. The lover never stopped believing, was defeated not by doubt, but by paper, twice over, by the father who stole the letters going out and the wife who kept the one coming back. And the scandal of Georgia, the wickedest woman in the county, the name mothers use to frighten daughters, kept one vow to a dead man's memory for 50 years and lit a valley every Saturday night. And the man across the valley kept his porch light on too, and neither of us ever knew we were answering each other. 2 lighthouses, 1 fog, all of it, start to finish, done by paper and undone by paper. I took Abigail inside and made her tea, and I showed her the notebook on the mantel, and I told her what I'm telling you. It goes to the state archive when I go, sealed 30 years, every wheel and gear of how this county actually ran. Historians can have the reckoning. I'm done keeping accounts. And to you, especially you, the woman watching this past midnight with your own tin box of unsaid things, whatever they call you in your town, whatever story got told about you while the truth sat in somebody's drawer, hear an old madam's last entry. You are not the story they tell about you. You are the story you never got to tell, and it is never, ever too late to tell it. I'm 74 and I just did. Now it's your turn, and I mean it. Was there a Miss Bell in your town? A woman everybody judged and nobody knew? Or were you her? Tell me in the comments and tell me what city you're watching from, because I'll be on this porch tomorrow evening with my tea, reading every word. Good night from Georgia, sugar. The magnolias are blooming. Somebody should see them.